Welcome, everybody, as you assemble. Thanks so much for joining us. You should see a quick survey just so we can. I think it's the other survey, and it's the survey of who's joining us this evening. So it would be, are you a ninth grader or 10th grader? Are you a parent or that kind of stuff? If you could let us know, it'll help us make sure that we're covering what makes the most sense this evening. We are super happy to be with you. A couple of housekeeping details before I get out of the way and let our incredible panelists talk. We will be sharing tomorrow the recording for this webinar and any materials we mention this evening. Please, as you have questions, if you can, there we go. If you can, use the Q&A function within Zoom. I'll try to handle your questions as best as I can. If they're really specific, we'd love to talk to you one-on-one about questions you have about college counseling or test prep. We'll give you a heads up when we have about 10 minutes left. We'll try to go Q&A. I'll do it live as we go. And then if there are questions that come up that I think a panelist can handle real time, we'll definitely try to do that. Now, this evening, why would we have a webinar of parents of sophomores and tell them junior year starts now? Well, on this webinar, we have folks who've been working with kids for more than 20 years. And what we've seen over the last several years is that in many ways, junior year in terms of college admissions, college testing, actually starts in April of sophomore year. There are critical choices in front of you. And this evening, we want to give you context for understanding those choices and understanding how to always put your child at the center of that and how to keep stress as far away from it. Number two, every year, one of our colleague companies surveys students and parents, and they ask them, what do you think about college admissions? And without fail, their advice to parents who have younger kids is, we started too late. We need to start early. And we wish we knew the implications of choices that we were making. So that's why we're so excited to have you here this evening. We have an incredible panel. Lisa Bain Carlton, the founder of College Matchpoint, Riley Wieners, who's one of our coaches at College Matchpoint, Jed Appleruth, the founder of Appleruth. And they really are going to dig in and talk at a parent level and at a student level about what the priorities are in front of you and the things you might want to keep in consideration. Now, this webinar is part of a series of webinars that we've had this spring to really help families understand the choices in front of them and the information they need to consider as they make those choices. College admissions decisions are literally coming down as we speak for high school seniors. Last Thursday was big day. It's called Ivy Day. Duke, in all their dukiness, waits until today to share their decisions. But as of tomorrow, most, if not all, the decisions are down, and our teams dig in and look at the data. And we have two webinars in May. It's that much information that we need to spread it across two webinars. We have a webinar on May 4th about the actual data, the statistics. We also look at it from a student standpoint. We share some case studies. And then we also talk about the outcomes and how that might influence the choices that a family is making. And then 2 days later, we have a panel of admissions directors from a whole host of schools who talk about it from their side of the desk, if you can imagine it. Lisa Bain Carlton will be moderating both those webinars. Every year when we host those webinars, parents tell us this was the most useful 2 hours I spent all year setting expectations for myself and helping direct the conversations I have with my child. So we're going to leave this up for a minute. If you'd like to join the webinar, please just let us know by providing your email, and we'll sign you up for both of them. Now, to give you a little context, This conversation this evening is based on 18 years of experience across college counseling and test prep, but it's also really key to this year's results because college admissions and testing change so much. It's almost a log roll, if you will, of new normals. And so, what we try to do is take those student stories, that information, draw back, and then look at the kind of advice and counsel we want to share with all of you this evening. So I'm going to stop screen sharing and I'm going to invite Lisa Bain Carlton to sort of set the table for where sophomores are developmentally and how that influences the priorities and the focus that they have right now. Lisa, could you start us off?
Sure. Thank you. And we're so glad that you're all here with us tonight. Sophomore year is a fun year for students, I think. You know, they're already they've gotten acclimated to high school and they're usually involved in some activities at that point. Not like with the super big focus necessarily, but they're exploring. So developmentally, what's appropriate at this point is exploration, okay? And so a lot of great things can kind of, I always think of it as setting the table for college admissions. You're not to the point where you have to have all the biggest things done, but you're sort of setting the table. And I think the biggest opportunity and a place where parents can really support their kids is helping them explore leadership, service, whatever kinds of things interest them, and really following their interest and their aptitudes. For some kids who are like a little more hesitant to get involved in activities, sometimes you might try something as a family first. I've had some families do that with really good luck, like kind of starting either some kind of service project, or I had a family that went all over Texas doing these like historical videos about different historical sites in Texas. And so the kid did the videos, but it was like a kind of a family thing. But it set him up to get super interested in a certain part of Texas history on down the line. So whether it's a student who's pretty gung-ho and going to jump out there on their own, or might need a little more support to do that, we really want to see exploration. What maybe isn't developmentally appropriate at this stage is for a student to be able to list to you exactly what they want and how they want to do it. They're not at that spot. And while it's tempting for us to just go ahead and wish that we could fast forward them to that spot, it really isn't where they're at this moment. And I think sophomore year and especially the summer after sophomore can be an incredibly great time to dig in and explore some things, not worrying if it's the thing, if there is a the thing. And Riley will talk about that. But to just get them exposed to different things. And if some of it can be a little bit in areas where maybe they're strong academically, that they might want to explore kind of areas of major, again, there's not, it's equally as great. I had a student a few years back who spent a summer in an engineering office in Houston, and he hated it. I mean, he hated it. That was such a win. We knew by June of I think it was June or July, before junior year that, oh, he doesn't actually want to be an engineer, even though he had all the aptitudes and all the things. He now is a big finance guy in New York. But so it doesn't, these are not things that we have to have these huge success or shiny stories, but actually getting the kids to actually step out into the world and try on things that are going to match with their skills and interests. And that's really what we're wanting to do at this time. Not increase a whole lot of stress about college, but get them focused, which is part of high school, right? This is a part of having a good high school experience. So that really is kind of where we locate ourselves. Riley, would you add anything to that? Do you have anything to add to that?
No, Lisa, I think you covered it really, really well. I think some things that jumped up in my mind as you were talking is kind of this interesting location kind of between freshman year, right? That grace
Uh-huh.
period of adjusting, kind of transitioning to high school rigor, starting to understand the expectations of a high school curriculum,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Also socially adjusting, making
Oh,
friends, trying to figure
100%.
out what their place is. And then also junior year, which is notoriously the toughest year in the high school kind of journey, right? And it's the last full year of grades that colleges are seeing and the applications. So we're here in this middle ground where I think, Lisa, you covered it really well. It's time to start exploring and getting out of that comfort zone, looking beyond just what do I need to do to get the grades and who am I? What are my values? How can I start to put those into place kind of thing. And I think Lisa, you said this in maybe different ways, but they're starting somewhere, right? Not necessarily the perfect place, but starting somewhere is the most important thing. I think momentum is more important than the perfect plan, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I do want to say if you're on this webinar with a sophomore and you're not at this place yet, please take a deep breath. We're fine. We're absolutely fine. There's still plenty of time, and we are, just entering April tomorrow. So there's still time to maybe, if your student really has been hesitant, maybe your eyes on the summer, right? And so you've still got some time. So I don't want this to raise anxiety for anyone who maybe isn't there. We see kids have success with lots of different trajectory. So, but just kind of laying out what we can use this year for, I think it can be really, really helpful.
Jed, one of the questions that comes up very frequently is we just heard so much about standardized testing. Are we still test optional? Have we switched to test required? We're a parent with a sophomore, and this is our first rodeo. Can you give parents on this a sense of what they should be thinking about in terms of plans for testing?
Yep. When you finish up sophomore year, a matter of a couple months, that's when I believe it's open season for testing. Assuming you finished Algebra 2, that's behind you, then essentially you are going to make that pivot to think about testing and the timing of testing. And typically that should live in the junior year, either the summer before junior year to at the latest the summer before senior year. Because essentially most kids are going to be applying early somewhere middle October, 1st of November. And so the last real test on your plate would be the September SAT. That's guaranteed to count for early. And you want your best shot for that early, for the reach you're going for, whatever is on for that early round. And so that means testing has to be done. There's still time afterwards for the regular apps, but your best shot, I want testing to be at the highlight if we can do it. Typically, the timeline for testing, we recommend very strongly kids having a 3 test plan in there, so that could be 3, 1 this summer, 2 in the fall. That could be 1 in the fall, 2 in the spring and winter. It could be all 3 next summer potentially, because now there are a lot more tests in the summer. But essentially, I want to be looking at the schedule and saying I want to be finished by here for my apps to turn them in with my best score possible. So looking at junior year, you got to figure out, when am I going to test? Looking at the calendar, when does it make the most sense? Don't put the test prep during their most intense season. Whether, if they're in the school play, memorizing lines, if they're the varsity athlete traveling a bunch, if they're, whatever it is, you want to have them test during the relatively lightest time. And understanding that, it is a big year, it's a busy year, but there'll be some months that are going to be pretty hardcore and some months that'll be, relatively a little bit lighter. And that's when you want to put, the majority of the prep if you can. And that's why a lot of our really high flyers with very advanced schedules do prep over the summer before they're a junior. And they work in 10 hours, 12 hours, they do a course, and then they can lock in some of their actual tests. It could be the October SAT, it could be the November SAT, those kind of things. But many of our high flyers do some prep over the summer, which you're about to enter into in a matter of months. So that's very common, very appropriate. If you are in Algebra 2 next year or the equivalent, then you want to wait until you get at least 1 full semester of Algebra 2 under your belt, which means you would save testing either until the February ACT and start from there, February, April, June, July, so forth, or you'd wait until that March SAT. And that's totally appropriate. Again, with enough, now there are, like 8 SATs during the course of the year. It's almost every other month or so. And there's like 5 in a row from September through December. So you can definitely fill your testing plan in. But if you've already finished Algebra 2, you're on to pre-cal or calculus, as a junior, you're good to go. So I think it's time to think about it, look at the schedule, and consider is it time to move to testing now, or just put it somewhere in the calendar. And let's go ahead and pivot, with academics, talking about, the testing. There are APs coming up in May for the sophomore year, and then of course next May. And I probably wouldn't have kids do the May SAT if they're taking 4 AP exams. Just be mindful that when kids are prepping really, really hard, they want to focus, and AP work is real work and a lot of hours if you want 5s or strong scores on those. So I would say if you can, kind of work around that May test if you're on a heavy AP load. But beyond the testing piece of the AP exams and SAT, then there's grades, academics, what that year means. I think I'll pass that on over to you. I think Lisa, yeah.
Yeah, I have one other question that I think people might have about testing before we jump to academics. Are students supposed to prep for both tests equally? Like
Oh,
how
right.
do you help them know what's going to be the best test for them? Because I know this is a common question we get for parents.
Sure.
And do all colleges take either test? Because I know
Yep.
that's another common question we get.
Yes. So colleges are completely agnostic. SAT, ACT, they couldn't care which one. And so much of it's geographic. In certain marketplaces where we work, almost everyone takes the SAT. Certain places where everyone, statewide tests or the ACT, that's the dominant test. In Chicago or other places. And so colleges across the country couldn't care which one you take, as long as you have a good test. Having 2 good tests doesn't get you any points. We're getting kids into every MIT, Stanford, Harvard with 1 test. You don't need 2 tests. That's just more work on you got to find out which one is your better test. And the way you do that is by giving everyone a baseline practice test. And now these tests have gotten short. SAT, it's 2 hours, 24 minutes with that 10-minute break in the middle. And now the ACT, if you're going to bail on science, which is optional, and over a third of our kids aren't doing science, then it's 2 hours and 5 minutes. So you could theoretically, on a weekend, do a Saturday SAT, a Sunday SAT, and you're done, and you have your baseline, or wait a week, between. But I wouldn't wait like 5 months, because there are some developmental changes in content and mastery and so forth. But get your baseline test unprepped, unprimed, and then compare them. And if you're more than 60 points higher on the SAT scale on one or the other, you go with that test. If you're within 40 points or so then you just choose the one that you prefer. You prefer the way they present math questions or the timing, even though my score is pretty close, because at that point, just go with your preference. But if you're bigger than the margin of error on both tests, then go with that. If I get a 1280 on the SAT and a 25 on the ACT, I'm going with the SAT. And knowing that it's totally fine. There are definitely differences in the assessments. In terms of timing and pacing, SAT is definitely faster. In terms of level of reading, the SAT is two grade levels higher. So you have a fast ACT, you have a more reading advanced SAT. You have more complicated math SAT, but much broader math on the ACT. So there are differences, but trying to tease it out mentally go ahead and just give them a practice test, and then go with that, and that'll be the guiding light to figure out which test you go for, and then go from there. And whether you go into a class or self-prep or one-on-one prep, whatever it is, but you have your test and your plan ahead.
And one last question about testing that I think we still get a lot is, well, I hear that, testing isn't that important, that a lot of colleges are test optional. So can you kind of speak to the trends that we're seeing with that? Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And I realize now that Bob asked part of it before. Ultimately, yes. And in the world that we live in 2019, the world was test required. And there were a handful of schools that were test optional. And they made big headlines when they went optional in Chicago or Worcester Poly. Then the entire universe went test optional, except for the Florida schools, for a quick minute when kids couldn't get tests. And we struggled in 2020, 2021. It was a very interesting time. But now we're seeing, the dust is settling, and the very top schools in the country, many of them are going back test required. Many of the big flagship state schools are going back test required. And every year we're adding 5 or 6 or 7 new ones. And so, we just added LSU. Within months of that, it was Auburn, it was Alabama, it was Ohio State. And then in these selectives, like last year, we added University of Miami, we added Princeton, we added Penn. Little by little, they're coming back. So, it's a relatively small portion of schools in the country, but what it's doing, it's driving most kids who are, going for, or highly ambitious, going for a strong school. Suddenly, they have to have a test if they want to include any of these 35 schools in their testing plan. There are definitely students whose grades are amazing, his rigor is amazing, and their baseline tests are so low that it would be such a lift to get to a competitive test score that some of them just say, I'm going to go with my grades, my rigor, my essay, everything else. It would just be such a lift to get to anywhere that's marginally competitive. But some kids have a decent baseline, and then it's like, you know what, time to go to work, to have a test. And even schools that are not test required, those top schools, testing matters at the majority of schools that are test optional. And a strong test score will make a difference. There are a handful of schools, about 50, many of them in California, that are test blind. Like UC Davis, they don't care. They wouldn't look at it if it's amazing and perfect. But that's a very small number of schools. Most of them are in the Cal State, UC system. There are very few schools that are test blind, and then there are fewer every year. Worcester Poly is flipped back, Caltech flipped back, and Caltech flipped test required. So we're seeing this trend that testing matters. It means something. It can definitely help you. A strong test score can push you over. But even schools that are test optional, be mindful that having strong test scores can be impactful to admissions and some kids for scholarships too.
Thank you, Jen. Appreciate it. I think one thing as counselors that we're seeing is that really strong test scores really mattered this year. And I think we're definitely seeing that that's sort of progressively happened over the last few years. But I think this year, especially when I look at my students and their performances, I think that their tests mattered. And I think something that we haven't given a lot of talk to until now, but I think is also really mattering, is if your school is a school that offers AP courses, we're really seeing that the AP courses and the AP test scores, if you've got, especially you got that 5, can really help. So I think that one of the things that we have going on in high schools right now is that we have a lot of grade inflation. So it's very common for, in the state of Texas, I think the average GPA is just over a 3.5. So that's very high, and so what does that mean? It means that it's hard for these colleges to differentiate how much rigor a student can actually handle, right? And so I think that we sort of swung because of COVID to tests, and then the UC system kind of bagged the tests, and we were that way. And I think we've made a pretty significant shift back to testing. And even with, I think, the AP testing sometimes can be a competitive advantage. Now, don't panic if your student is at a school that doesn't offer AP tests. There's not any penalty for them, because every student is always being read in the context of their school. But if they're available and if they're taking the class, I think there is we didn't get a test score. Wonder what that was about, right? So I think it's just another part of your testing plan as you think about testing, and another reason that it helps to start earlier to kind of knock off all these things, that those AP tests, in addition to your SAT or your ACT, can have a pretty significant impact. Riley, anything you want to add to the testing piece here?
Yeah, I guess I kind of just wanted to emphasize something Jed mentioned, which was that even our high flyers, right, are building in the time for several rounds of improvements, for several rounds of preparation. So I think there's maybe a myth out there that, I get stunning grades. I've never gotten a B in my life. My GPA is perfect, so I'm only going to have to take the test once and I'll push it, right? So just really build in that time. I think it's about learning the test, getting your repetitions, seeing the areas specifically where you can improve, and giving yourself, the runway to really achieve that, whether you're getting straight A's or maybe have some C's in there. You know what I mean? We all need to prepare pretty similarly, I would say. So
I think
Yeah.
so too. Like the whole three-pack idea. One of my best friend, his daughter is a junior right now, taking
Mhm.
this thing and going for she's dying for Vandy. She's committed. She went there and fell in love, which happens.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that 34 could make a difference for her. And from where she started, it was, she's been
Mhm.
putting in the work. And, you really have to plan, because part of it, I was explaining to my friends, like there's random variation in terms of, and then and a super score. They'll cherry pick your best section,
Right.
from the February test, your best section from the April test. And in the grand scheme of things, you might hit a passage that's just a little bit harder for you for some reason, or a passage that you read in school and know it back and forth. And then suddenly that, you crush that one. Or it could be you guess right or wrong a couple times, or I'm a careless error here and there. And that in and of itself can swing things. When you're getting in the upper echelons, like, one missed question or two can drop things substantially. And so that's where there's just some randomness and variations. That's why taking it more than once is a smart plan. And some kids are one and done, love that. But I want to have three in the pack. And if we need to use two, okay, or all three, normal. And so just have that as the plan when you start this process as a junior.
And I think that's so important what Riley said. Build that into your timing. I had a student this year who was a sophomore, and we had mapped out all his tests. Now he got lucky and was one and done.
Perfect.
Great.
Yeah.
But he had all this he was a row, there was a lot of things going on that we were going to have to work around to get the three. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Way better to know how you're going to get there. And then if you can't, that's okay. So
Yeah.
this is something that whether your student is going to be done with Algebra 2 this year or next year, kind of just knowing that this is ahead of you and thinking as a family how you're going to approach that and the time needed to commit to it, I think is very important and really is critical to this process for sure. So we're going to change the subject a little bit now off of testing, although who knows, we might come back to it, to academics, because I think that this is also, as Riley said, students have gotten used to high school now. And so many students are either have or are in the process of choosing classes, right, for next year. And I do think that choosing your academic courses is really important to this process. It needs to make sense, okay? And what I mean by making sense is I'm just going to use an example of a student wants to be a business major, let's say. So most schools for business majors do like to see calculus. So we've got to make sure that the student, or certainly the more selective schools, we need to make sure that there's room for that sequence because sometimes that surprises students. And I've had students who had to take pre-cal in the summer so they can take their calculus in so you're starting to get to the point where you want to make class choices first based on ability. Like if you're not a math person, you're not a math person. So, but you also do want to tilt it a little bit towards the areas of interest. And I might even speak broadly areas of interest. Are you more of a math science person or are you more of an English person or are you that kid that's good at all of it or the kid that doesn't really like any of it, right? So we kind of got to know like where you're falling in there. You Sometimes I feel like students are sort of throwing a dart at a board on, oh, that sounds cool. You really do want to help your student put some thought into their class choices because when the whole application is delivered across the computer, it's not paper, is and someone's reading it, they're looking for like, oh, okay, this matches this goes with this. So it is important to think about classes. That does not mean, though, that there's a school in town here that's great at art history, so everybody likes to take the art history. That's fine to have that in there, but you do want to make sure in your core classes that you are taking your rigor in those spots that you're interested in and think about what your goals are, like what colleges you're starting to think that you might be aiming for, because that's going to impact the level of rigor that you want to take. So those decisions, and they're really different at every school and every school district right now. But you definitely don't want to just do that haphazardly. You want to give that some thought and again, some planning. Sounds like we're saying planning a lot, but I do think that you can solve a lot of problems in the college process by just doing some thoughtful planning up front and make this whole process a lot easier. Riley, what would you add to the academics?
Yeah, I mean, just going off of the kind of course selection discussion, I do think it's kind of the first and easiest way to sort of open yourself up to classes that are going to support your future goals, right? Obviously, we're still in the exploration phase, so we don't necessarily know I want to be a doctor at this point in time, right? But if we generally are looking at our kind of freshman year results and how we felt in classes, we're reflecting a little bit, wow, actually chem or, science came really easy to me. So I think I'll push myself in this field and maybe that will help clarify my interest toward pre-med, right? It's kind of Lisa, you said something awesome the other day in a separate meeting, but you're in the middle of the painting right now, right? So it's sometimes hard to see the end results or kind of even where you started, but really reflecting on where you're at in the process can be really important in choosing those courses. I'll say too, I think I get a lot of anxiety from students sometimes when they think they like STEM and then they have a class that rocks their world and they're like, oh, maybe that's not exactly where I want to go. That is
Mhm.
okay. That is part of that exploration. If we can track the choices that we make on the transcript and the courses kind of with a narrative and with our activities and the way the whole journey has gone, that's valid and that's okay, right? It doesn't have to be perfectly linear or perfectly planned out in this trajectory, right? We're human beings. These students are human beings. So just yeah, kind of couching everything in that a little bit, I think. But yeah, I mean, I have a lot to say sort of on on selective schools and what they want, but I'm not sure. Are we ready to kind of jump into that?
Let's do a couple things here and then we'll go there. How about that? Um,
Perfect.
I think what you have to understand as parents is we're going on hypotheses right now, right? We're not sure. So
Mhm.
sometimes we're going to get it wrong. The trick of if or that wasn't the direction that the student ended up going, that's not a problem as long as we can reflect on what happened. Do you know what I mean? From this, I took engineering and I learned that honestly, I don't think that way. Actually, I think this way. You know what? So if you can flip that thing that didn't work out well around and you can tell the story of it, you can get by with mistakes in this process. I mean, not a bazillion of them, but and depends on where you want to go. But they can be really good things because one of the things colleges love is honest reflection. Not all this polished up, over polished, whatever. And they're dealing with humans. And so, what's more refreshing than someone saying, I thought that I was going this way and I was really wrong and actually I was going that way. That there's a lot in that that a student can get from it. So I want to acknowledge that as we're doing that, every year I have one junior, it never fails, that comes to me in the spring of the junior year and goes, "You're gonna hate me for this conversation." It always starts that way. And I'm like, "No, I'm not." And then they say, I decided I don't want to be an X and now I want to be a Y. And it's like, great, amazing. We know that now. Let's make a plan, right? So while we're wanting to start early, the beauty of early is we also have some traction on activities and things. So we also have the ability, if down the line we need to shift something. So I think that is one of the things that can help because they have to get exposed to these things to know really what they want. So that's just to kind of give a little comfort that if it gets off track, we can get them back on track, is what I'm saying. So yes, now what I want to do is jump into a topic that I know many of you are probably interested in, and that is so my student is really interested in selective schools. How do I jump in and help them be prepared? Like, what are they going to need? What are the schools looking for? And here we are in the sophomore year. what is it that I should be doing right now? Riley. That's
All
not a
right.
big question for
Yeah,
you.
no, it's
Start
I was
wherever
just
you
gonna
want to
say.
start.
Yeah, no, this is a massive question, I
No,
think.
and
But I'll try
we
to.
can take it into multiple parts. Yeah.
Mhm. Yes, I think the main goal, honestly, is kind of simplifying it a little bit. So, obviously, college processes are unique to those schools, right? To what they're looking for specifically, to their institutional priorities. So, and not so surprisingly, colleges aren't very transparent about what they're necessarily looking for, right? So, in order to kind of simplify and take some of the guesswork out of it, I think we can try to think of it in a pretty simple framework, right? I think of it maybe in two buckets, possibly more, but let's say two for now. Number one, can you handle the academics, right? This information is largely going to come from the transcript, the cornerstone of the application, right? Like what classes have you taken? How have you pushed yourself? And how have you performed? What are the trends? Not just what are the grades, but what are the trends on that transcript, right? Do we have upward trends since a maybe challenging sophomore year or freshman transition, like really looking at that holistic contextual transcript. So that's the first academic quantitative bucket. The second is test scores, which I think we talked about quite a bit. Those two quantitative pieces interact a little bit as well. So say that there's maybe some blemishes on the transcript, if you can kind of ease the admission officer's mind with a really strong test score, that definitely helps, and kind of vice versa too. So that's academic, quantitative. Can you handle school, right? Can you handle the classroom? The second bucket, and it's increasingly important now, is what do you bring to a college community, right? And kind of secondarily, how does that fit with that college's priorities, which applicants really don't have that much control over. So that's, yeah, neither here nor there. But this means not just in the classroom, right? You're showing up on a college campus, living there, right, for 4 years. So it's got to be what you're bringing outside of the classroom too. What is a student's main values and qualities, and how have these sort of been demonstrated over time or developed over time throughout the different kind of application components, through activities, through coursework, through impact, right? And then, is there a particular context? So background experiences, socioeconomic, religious, geographic, cultural context that makes that you've explored and represent well with and speak on in your application that will kind of add to the uniqueness or diversity of your class. So I think colleges, maybe 20 years ago, were focused more on that first bucket. Like, is this student capable? Will they be okay here? And now it's just a little bit more nuance, a little bit more about fit to the culture of the school, fit to the program and major that they're applying to. And what they will bring as a whole person to a campus. So I think starting to really reflect on those things and gather those values and follow those threads is a huge piece of the puzzle. Yeah. Does that make sense? I'm
That's
rambling
great.
now.
And I should have said Riley was formerly an admissions person at Stanford. So she has a lot of experience behind the desk as well. So she's actually lived on both sides of this, which is super helpful for this conversation. Riley, how does a student go about figuring out kind of their values and how they would show their values? Like, what would that look like in real life?
Yeah, no, I love that. And I actually have a couple examples that I think are of students this round that I really was proud of. So I think I don't know. A lot of times I have students come in even as early as sophomore or junior year and think, wow, I need the most impressive internship. I need to publish research. How else am I going to distinguish on the applications? And there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress there. So I think the first step is to relax a little bit, to take a deep breath, look at yourself and how you show up in your communities and what really matters to you and what is interesting to you. Start small, right? So I have a student who he sophomore year didn't really know exactly what he wanted to do for a career or for a major, which not many of us do at that time, right? I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. But he knew he loved playing soccer, and he knew he was starting to recognize in class that he was pretty math oriented, came naturally to kind of work through data and just, a little more math oriented. So perfect. That's all we know. So we had a lot of conversations about how to kind of pull on those threads a little bit, and eventually came up with an idea to do his own kind of independent research project over the summer. He had his teammates fill out kind of a questionnaire about nutrition, hydration, sleep level, and he turned this into a model on predicting injuries, right? So we're combining soccer and math in a pretty simple way, in a way that he was excited about. His teams use that data now to make sure they avoid injuries, and they're doing really well. So not just his high school team, also his club team. So he's using it in multiple sort of contexts. And it's a simple idea that he cares about, right? And it shows kind of intellectual exploration, the ability to kind of work through problems, follow a project all the way to the end, and ultimately impact, a community. And it's low key, right? It's not like we're curing cancer, but we are making an impact in his team in a different way beyond just playing soccer, right? So starting small and thinking of ways to combine the things that you already care about naturally, I think is a really cool place to start.
Absolutely. I think that's such a good point. I think oftentimes we think that we have to start like with something that's totally different or new. And I always just want to like know everything a student is doing and see what you can play off there. That's not to say not to add new things if things sound good. And especially as you go on towards like junior and senior year, I'm a way bigger fan of adding to what you've done than like having 9,000 different things. Do you know what I'm saying? So, and what I love about that example, it's such a good example. It's so specific to him. Like, there's not 19 other kids that are going to have that same exact thing. And that's when you know you got it something good. Do you know what I'm saying? When it's like, can be really like, there's not a lot of, I mean, certainly somewhere, maybe someone else has done that. But like it's pretty darn unique to his interest set, because he had the skill in math and the combination that he was using. And I think, and like you say, pretty simple, right? So those are the kinds of things that do kind of like jump out. There's also all sorts of ways he could have kept going, off of that too, right? Like that could balloon 1,000 other ways. And so I think those kind of things can be super, super helpful. Riley, what about the kiddo who maybe we've talked STEM a lot. Let's go to humanities side for a minute. I know we like that. Is like what about the student that maybe isn't like the big doer, but like loves to read and those kind of things? How do you typically kind of advise them in this space?
Yeah, I love that. I love that question. I think, it comes from a similar place of literally just looking at like, what do you like? What book, if you do like to read, what books are you drawn to? What characters speak to you most and why? Like reflecting on what really sticks, kind of emotionally, academically, intellectually, and starting there. Like I kind of have an example with that one too, actually. I have another student who um kind of was resistant to exploring her family background, her identity a little bit. She was a kind of first generation immigrant, and she was a little bit resistant, right? Just wasn't fully open to engaging, and then eventually kind of went home on a family trip, learned about her grandfather's kind of heritage and the village that he came from, and started just reflecting and realizing, wow, this village is actually kind of the language that this village speaks is an endangered language. It's actually disappearing. And so she got really passionate, diving into her own family history, her personal background about this issue that organically came up kind of into her world. And she started a platform to, was authentically really motivated, which I think is a huge piece. That comes from her family ties, right? And so she started a platform to educate people about endangered languages, about how cultural preservation, about the dangers of that, and about how to shift it ultimately, and kind of built on that over time as well. But that was her baby, right? That was her brainchild. That was her project. It came from a personal sort of identity reflection. So it's not always deep research or some crazy internship. Sometimes it's really just thinking deeply about yourself, about your background, about where you come from, and learning about issues that you are passionate about and exposing yourself to those.
Oh, that's a great example. And I know that we have quite a lot of Texans on the call tonight. And so one of the things about UT Austin that I'm just going to spend a hot second on, which I would say sort of translates to big state schools in general, it's just UT Austin is sort of the extreme of it, I would say, is that one of the reasons it's really important to start early is because they are so major focused. And so, a student really needs 3 or 4 beats relating to the major. And we really saw that this year. We saw 2 things. We saw that if they did not have the grades in the area they wanted to study, they didn't get in. And even if they were in the top 5% with an automatic admit, they did not get their major. And was a new, like normally they've really tried to give them their majors, but you really had to line up both academically and extracurricularly to get that major, especially if you're going for nursing, medicine, business, engineering, computer science, the highly competitive majors. But we saw that it made a lot of the rounds of listservs and whatever. It was quite a thing this year. So I think that speaks to starting early. And I think one of my favorite examples was a young woman who was just brilliant, but incredibly introverted, like really was not a person who liked to go out and do with other people. So we were talking about how are we going to do her resume, because UT does these resumes, which you shouldn't really call a resume, but they're like 5 pages long. They're crazy long. And so I'm just racking my brain, but she read like 5 books a week. So we cataloged her books and what she and a little bit about why, because you have a lot of freedom in these resumes to make it however you want. So I was like, we're just going to try this and see what happens. And so she cataloged all her books into genres and when she read them, and it was really, the thing was long because she read a lot of books. She got in for sure in the English major, and I always was like, it just, and I tell that story because there's a lot of ways to go at this. There's not just one way to go at it. It's not just the kiddo who wants to join everything who can do this, but and sometimes it's just digging and getting creative about, okay, wait, she actually is doing a lot to show that she'd be a great English major. Now, our job is to show it, right? And to be able to reflect on it. So I think for those on the call that are, and certainly lots of people want to go to UT who are not live in Texas as well, I might add. This is becoming more and more important. So we want to line up the coursework. We need to have the grades in those classes, the test scores in the areas, like for example, if it's a math heavy, it needs to have the high math score. If it's more humanities, then it needs to have the strong reading. So all the things and the resume need to line up in order to be able to get those majors. And I think this year we some students were really, disappointed that while they had worked so hard to be in the top 5% of their class, they were maybe missing that part and did not get the major they wanted, which at these big universities is hard because it's harder to move around than at our mid-size or smaller schools. So that makes it challenging. So that's another spot for if a student is a UT or bust, you definitely need to start younger because you don't have time to accomplish all those things that you're going to need to be a strong applicant, for sure. Anything to add to that, Riley?
I mean,
Now
I
that
I could nerd out
become a
all day,
UT,
probably.
now
Yeah.
you become a UT expert too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess I think we're talking a lot about activities, exploration. The other sort of piece of the puzzle is exploring campuses, schools, traveling, going
100%.
to see the environments too, like obviously we want to get the testing right, get the transcript, we want to make sure activities are building, we have some momentum. But starting to look earlier and more often at schools, I think, is like boots on the ground on campus. What's the energy? Do you like how you feel on this college campus? The size, the location, and then secondarily maybe kind of the the programs and the deeper research. But I think it's never too early to start that either. Yeah.
I agree. And my favorite year for students to visit colleges is sophomore year, because I am noticing more and more that the junior year is so busy that families have trouble finding the time to go. They don't want to miss school because they're taking all these rigorous classes. And so, and sophomore year, you can visit with the temperature down at a level that by the time we get to spring of junior year, the temperature is a little higher. So I think that really helps. And I must make a plea for this, because I just always do, is that if you're going to go, I just highly encourage you. It's fine to go to the most competitive schools in the country, but please just add some others in too if you're going to go on a college trip. Because then, today I was on with one of my rock star students, but the two really like less than 10% acceptance schools that she now has on her plate, she hasn't visited because they were very busy visiting the all the Ivy League schools. So that's fine, but just make sure you're including some other ones so that your student does get some variety. And I think in sophomore year, it's a great time. Every student right now thinks they want to go to the big rah-rah campus. And if they want to, I think that's great. But it is good to expose them, because that's all they're seeing on TV or hearing about, just to show them some of these other campuses. That doesn't hurt anything for them to see that. So when you get out there, I encourage you to just have a little breadth in that. Your senior self is going to thank you for that. Okay. It really is. And oftentimes, colleges, if you're just looking at selectivity, you forget that they may have just the perfect program for you in your major, right? But they might not be the 10%. So seeing some variety of things that you're interested in early on can be super, super helpful. Yeah. Oh, wow. We've covered a lot.
We have 5 minutes left, and we're going to be posting a poll that if you'd like us to reach out and talk to you about any of the questions that we covered this evening or anything specific to your student. But what I'd like to ask as a last question is, Lisa talked about your senior self thanking you for right now. I'd like to take it a little more specific to what your June you would ask you to prioritize. Many families are finalizing their summer plans. Okay. It'll be here before you know it. And I'd like to go through each of our panelists and ask them to share one piece of advice on what families of sophomores should prioritize in finalizing their summer plans. Lisa?
I think that this is such a great summer. I would challenge each family to consider one thing, not the whole summer, because they're still kids, but one thing that the student is going to do related to some potential major that they might be interested in, or area of interest if they're more a broad student. One activity that they're going to do this summer that's more than 7 hours, like a little bit of time, not doesn't need to be 15 hours, but enough to be significant. Okay. That would be my challenge.
Great. Jed, as you
Yeah.
work with so many families of sophomores and they start to get itchy or anxious about test prep and tutoring, what would you encourage them to prioritize as they head into the summer?
This summer, I think as we look at it, by the end of the summer, their summer self, I want everyone to have at least looked at the calendar for the junior year. And because again, we have hundreds of kids who are prepping over the summer. And to figure out on, earlier, let's say, by June, it doesn't make sense for my kid to put in some of that work now, before the lifting begins, before things get intense. Should I do a group class? And if the answer is no, totally fine. And it could be, we're not going to prep until February. Totally fine. But I think if you do have a student who's academically rigorous curriculum, a lot of advanced classes, consider the possibility of should I allocate some of that time right now before there are other distractions, other obligations, to do some of the prep. And it's totally fine to do some prep, in June and July, and then come back later on and refresh and reinforce it. It's actually very, very, very common. So at least have a look at the schedule, at the rigor. And also for some kids who are looking at, a pretty hefty schedule, let's say they're going from 2 APs to 4, or, some kind of big jump, big lift. There's something we do at Apple Ruth. We do coaching for executive functioning, like EF coaching, we call it, helping kids get ready to manage themselves, their resources. Because for some kids do struggle a little bit going from that sophomore to junior year, because suddenly the workload gets bigger. Making sure you have good systems in place, with your calendars, your planning, doing a little bit of forethought, pre-thought before the workload gets bigger. Kind of doing some, even at the minimum, doing some reflection in terms of where all the pieces are going to fit in terms of activities and exercise and studying, doing a little bit of pre-work before the semester begins. To me, that's always a good thing. And especially before there are big changes, like before you're a junior and before freshman year of college. Those are two areas where I think that the workload, also going into ninth grade, those are the three kind of often pain points we see over the course of that high school to college shift. So do a little bit of, reflection, your systems, what are you using, your calendars, G calendar, how will you be organized going forward once the work starts to begin. That to me is a worthwhile reflection before you start junior year.
And Riley, if I remember correctly, this webinar is smack dab between two student meetings you have, where I know you're talking about summer priorities and plans for them. We've shared in the chat bot the College Match Point resources on summer, but Riley, what would you encourage parents and their kids to focus on as they finalize their summer plans?
Yeah, I love it. I love this question, Bob. Thank you. I think, I mean, Lisa, you kind of touched on this, I think, but my biggest piece of advice is to just start somewhere. You know what I mean? I think so often students and families launch right into what does this college expect of my student? What are they looking for? And we skip over that whole beautiful moment of sophomore year where teenagers get to discover themselves first, right? Take a deep breath as the summer starts and think back on your freshman and sophomore year. What challenged you, what excited you, and what threads do we want to pull on? So I think, start small. It doesn't have to be a 6-week research program. You know what I mean? It can be something really simple and meaningful to you that you then develop over time. So I think starting there. Other than that, everyone who works with us, of course, has a spreadsheet of some kind, but very kind of tangible goal is start a spreadsheet, start tracking your colleges, start taking notes, start doing some research, and start figuring out where you feel like you're at home, for the next chapter. It's kind of dual missions.
I love it.
Well, as you can tell from our panelists, we could go on for hours about this. We're nerds about testing and college admissions and tutoring, but at the end of the day, we're kid nerds. And we love talking to parents and students at this point. It may be hard to believe, but junior year has really begun in large part. And I hope you walk away from this webinar with a sense of priorities, of a game plan, of what you may want to prioritize. If you do have questions, I know we popped that up, but please feel free to email us back tomorrow. We'd be happy to jump on a Zoom and talk about your students specifically. And we wish you great success. We hope this journey, while it might be stressful, has more meaning and more purpose for you and your students as you navigate your journey to college. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.